it's a rev limiter within the speed limit in first gear is a really cool thing.
This thing is ridiculous.
It is insane. And you see, you already regret that you don't have one.
Well, let's not say that just yet.
Well, you know, we're gonna have to
I probably won't admit it.
If you love classic cars, then Donald loves you.
Antonio, not long ago, you and I were in a very small Fiat-powered car in Italy in the Mille Miglia.
Yes, we were.
I have the feeling that right now we're in the spiritual successor of that little car.
we are. This is a little bit more modern and a little bit more comfortable, though.
Yeah, I'd probably say one of the biggest differences is the fact that I'm not worried about the soles of my shoes coming off because of the heat coming through the floorboards.
Well, that was, I remember you on the Mille Miglia, you were very excited about your Sparco racing shoes, and unfortunately they melted halfway through on day one, but I don't think your shoes are going to melt in this car that we're driving today, Donald.
No, I think that part of it's the climate, but the other part is, so, I don't know, 60 years of development?
Yeah, slight development work.
Yeah, it's fun to compare in character and spirit this 2013 Fiat Cinquecento Abarth to that wonderful 1940 Viotti Coupe Aerodinamico. This is probably a car that seems so incredibly illogical. They actually sold this car to people out of the showroom in the US market. This car is crazy.
It is. We've only been in it for 5 minutes, and I'm sure you can hear how rowdy it is, the audience. And it's so obnoxious, and I feel like you hear it coming down the road and you think that there's going to be this big muscle car or something, and then you see a little Fiat 500, but it's great. It's amazing. It's an amazing car.
And I know that you are obviously a motorcycle fiend, and one of the aspects obviously of a motorcycle is how high the engines rev.
Yeah.
And you get that power all the way through the rev band, and this thing revs like a crazy demon. I mean,
yeah.
You touch the accelerator and the tach flies around to 4,500 RPM, and we're still within the speed limit.
Yeah, it's very much like the Miata formula, where you don't need a lot of horsepower, but you have a light car and it has a good power to weight ratio, and it just wants to rev freely and just have fun. I mean, this car is all about having fun.
And I remember back in my day when I was a young man, he talked about power and front wheel drive, and they were generally antithetical. And this, with all of the advancements in suspension geometry and certainly in tires, I'd probably say this car is on the limit of what you could put through the front wheels of this diameter in a car like this. 160 horsepower,
yeah.
Which, you know, today, even in 2013, was not certainly the end of the earth. But in a car this small and this light,
yeah,
it is amazing. I mean, you have to sort of use torque steer as your friend.
Yeah, it's when you get to the middle of the corner, you want to give it more gas, but you probably shouldn't, because you're going to be turning left and the car's going to go straight. But yeah, I mean, 160 horsepower in a car that weighs roughly 2,500 pounds is quite a big deal.
And you know, you and I agree. This is where I am young and you are old, and it's wonderful we meet in the middle, because people always throw around horsepower numbers and even torque numbers. You know, me and Torque were great friends. Went to junior high school together. But it is all about power to weight ratio. It's the package that makes it work. You know, we could be in some 600 horsepower, whatever, and having a good time.
Yeah.
But this is just like, this is a party.
It is a party, and the best thing about this is you're essentially going the speed limit. We always are,
yes.
Right? But you're essentially going the speed limit, and you don't feel like you need to go any faster.
Right.
And I feel like, especially with my generation, where when I was a kid, for example, right, in 05 or 04, 05, when the Ferrari F430 came out, that car had 485 horsepower, And I remember thinking, oh my God, 485 horsepower. The 360 had 400. Where are they going to go from there? And now you have the SF90 Stradale with almost 1,000 horsepower.
Exactly.
It gets to the point where, yeah, the horsepower is cool and the tech is cool, but what horsepower from that is usable? Probably as much as we're using today.
In most applications, you're absolutely right. And yes, if you went to a track day with this, you'd have a lot of fun.
For sure.
While you're doing 2 laps to every 10 laps that the guy in the SF90 is doing. But I think that they would still be absolutely hysterical.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that, as you said, within the speed limits, especially on a day like today, which is a bit wet and a little foggy, you don't want to go crazy. And you have so much fun within the speed limit zone, within the normal driving range in the street. As I like to say, you know, a trip to the cleaners becomes a lap of the Targa Florio. You know, it's just that kind of fun that you can have.
Well, I think
all the power is available to you all the time.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to the purity of driving. I mean, you can have so much fun with a little car. And the saying is so true, it's more fun to drive a slow car fast than a fast car slow.
Hit the rev limiter within the speed limit in first gear is a really cool thing.
It is quite the thing. Oh my. But yeah, I mean, it's more fun to drive a slow car fast than a fast car slow. And if we were in that SF90, we would have done a first gear pull. And if you went to Redline, we probably would have been about 60 or 70 miles an hour.
Easily. And, you know, to get to the rev limiter at 40 is really quite something. And, you know, even with the limitations of the sizes of the tires of this car, which aren't very wide, and the slightly wet surface, it still feels secure.
Yeah, it does seem, even from the passenger seat, it seems like it has a lot of grip and it doesn't seem like it's going all over the place, which gives you confidence and makes the driving experience fun.
It is an interesting thing. I remember I owned 2 of the modern BMW Minis, and I enjoyed them both tremendously, but I also found...
on my side.
I enjoyed both of my Minis immensely, but I also found that in wet conditions, they could be a bit tricky.
Yeah,
and I don't feel any of that in this car.
So that's true. So I have a modern BMW Mini. I have a 2016 Cooper S, and depending on what kind of tires you have to be careful in certain wet situations when you give it some gas, because it will understeer. But this seems like it's handling the road conditions quite well.
Yeah, and not that I want to disparage any tire manufacturer, but there's a major Italian car manufacturer, Italian tire manufacturer, that makes terrific, wonderful tires. But the original equipment on my first Mini, these delightful run flats that this Italian company made, I actually parked the car for the winter. It was absolutely hopeless.
No grip.
No grip at all. I mean, I think if the humidity got too high, the car lost grip.
Well, I think, especially with my experience with the Mini, I mean, it really does come down to the tires. When you have a tire that gives you confidence, it makes the experience that much better. And when I went to go purchase that car, I was thinking about buying one of these, but...
And why didn't you? Why didn't you pull the trigger here?
Being an internet wizard, I did a lot of research on both of the cars, and I saw that maybe not necessarily with this, as this is a 2013, and it seemed that some of the earlier models had some oil issues where they would burn oil, and some people were quoted saying that every 2 fill-ups they would have to put in a quart of oil. And I don't know how true that is, but that kind of turned me off to the Abarth. I'm quite happy with my choice in the Mini, but I think for a city car or a daily driver where you're in town, this would be an absolute blast.
Well, 2 things. This car is you. Sorry, I love the Mini, and your Mini is a terrific car, but this is Antonio.
What
Sorry.
you saying? I'm obnoxious or?
No. Obnoxious, loud, all that. No, absolutely not. What would make you think so? But this car really is your spirit, and it's a funny thing. We were chatting before about what it took to actually run a car back in the day, and it was not that long ago, before the age of 100,000 miles, before your first oil change.
That was in the
car.
dinosaur age, though.
Well, yes, the dinosaurs were there. They were actually helping us make the oil and fill our cars. But when you stopped for gas, you checked your oil. That was just sort of the normal standard operating practice. And of course,
Today,
everyone,
that's unheard of.
It's unheard of. Everyone changed their oil every 2,000 or 3,000 miles. Today, if you change your oil more frequently than the manufacturer suggests, then they punish you, which is something I don't understand at all. You can't ever change your oil too much, but
yeah.
And I think that a lot of those oiling issues in the early cars also came from people that probably weren't that familiar with the way turbos worked.
Yeah.
And I think they probably
warming the engine up,
and cooling the engine down. I think that they ignored those basic rules that you have to follow. And the other fact of the matter is that ultimately the market does speak. And what is really fascinating and I think terrific about these cars, even though, of course, Fiat came back to the U.S. after 27 years with the Cinquecento and then left again. Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe Stellantis will bring back the Fiat brand at some point. But this car had an MSRP of about $22,000 when it was new, and the used ones are now selling for about $13,000 or $14,000. So they have retained their value substantially.
And it's a great value for the car. I mean, I think the Abarth is a significant step up from the base model of this car.
Night and day. It's like the difference between a standard 356 Porsche B and a Carrera 2.
Yeah. I mean, the fit and finish of this car is really solid compared to the base. I mean, these seats are much nicer. The armrest, I've driven a couple of the base models where the armrest falls apart, and this armrest is not falling apart. You got a little bit of torque steer.
Got a little bit of torque steer there, exactly. It's like the wheels wanted to spin while they weren't attached to the pavement.
But it seems like, I mean, this is a 10-year-old car, and it looks brand new. I mean, it's held up very nicely.
It's got low miles. It's got a little over 3,000 miles, but there are no rattles in it.
It's super
the
solid.
stitching is really terrific and in very good shape. This it's a terrific car. It's one of those things that sort of reminds me of a very grown-up version of my Panda.
A little bit,
And it's got that same immediate spirit. And you talk about a city car. I took very long drives in my two Minis. I was living in New York at the time and regularly drove them from up to Canada for the Grand Prix and things like that. People thought I was insane, but nonetheless, there's something wonderful about taking a small, comfortable car on a long trip.
Yeah. And I think that at least you go to Europe and you see little cars everywhere. Whereas here in America, I feel like there is this undertone of prejudice against little cars. And I don't really know where that came from. Maybe because our cars here have always been really big.
Little equaled cheap, big equaled good.
Yeah, exactly. And also I think that there's some sort of, people think that little cars are not safe, which maybe back in the day, but a modern little car is incredibly safe.
We're surrounded by millions of airbags in this car.
Yeah.
The stability, again, is also quite good. So, the whole idea, well, you can get into a small car, you can get into a turn, it's going to roll over and crush you. That's not the case here. And, it's one of those things that's sort of a slightly self-fulfilling prophecy. If there are more big, tall, heavy cars on the road and you're in an accident, chances are you're going to be more injured in a small car than you'd be in a big car. But I can also say that you are the survivor of a fairly big accident in a fairly small car, and you're here and still riding your motorcycles and having fun and doing everything you need to do. So it's also this idea, it's a sort of a societal idea. In Europe, for years, the idea of the luxury Mini or the sporty Mini has always been a thing.
Yeah.
But in the United States, it has to be big and fast. It can't just be fast.
And I think that's, you talk about Mini, I think that's probably why they've been super successful as the premier small car luxury manufacturer, at least in the States, because they've introduced models like the Countryman and the Clubman, where they're slightly bigger and probably tailor more to the American market.
Right.
I think Fiat introduced the 500L, and I don't know if that was as successful as they wanted it to be.
God bless it. The 500L was a terrific vehicle, but one of those things that only a mother could love. Yeah, it was not. It was not.
If you remember their Super Bowl ad that they did with the old man in Italy, where he drops the Viagra out the window and it bounces down the street and it hits the 500 and it grows into the L.
I thought, first of all, how did they actually get away with that?
Yeah.
But yeah, and the sort of the crossover version, the 500X, I think is a much more successful car. But it was introduced, I think, a little too late by the time that sort of the bloom was off the rose, and gas prices had begun to fall again, so everyone went back into trucks.
Yeah, back into trucks, back into SUVs.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, you look at our film truck, for example, which is in front of us, which is a Suburban. Yeah, it's great. It carries all of our equipment. You can actually carry a decent amount of stuff in here if you fold the seats down. And if you're a person who you don't have children, or you use this as a commuter with your spouse or whoever it is, I mean, you can fit a lot of things. You mentioned a road trip.
Yeah.
I feel like this would be so much fun to drive up to New Hampshire or Vermont and hit all those back roads on, and then you can have a nice picnic. I mean, and again, talk about power, you don't really need more power, because I feel like you and I are having a lot of fun right now.
Exactly. And it's let's talk a little bit about the heritage of this car, because you know, the name Abarth really means something. Karl Abarth was a brilliant engineer and racer who designed high-performance parts for Fiat, and he ended up going to business for himself in the late 40s after he and his friend his friend Ferdinand Porsche did some work for Piero Duzio for Cisitalia. And basically on the bones of Cisitalia, the Abarth company started on its own, building its own cars, and was incredibly successful in sports car racing and hill climbs, and also mastered the kit. So Abarth built complete cars based on the Fiat 500 and 600, but they also sold kits so that dealers and tuners could use their parts to build their own hot cars. And legendary across Europe, and especially in Italy. And I was really happy to see that Fiat brought the Abarth mark back in a real way. Not just a badge on a car to say, oh, this is a sporty one, it's got stripes and a badge, but to have the performance to match the Abarth name. And that's fantastic.
Well, I think one of the coolest cars from the 60s was the 500 Abarth, where they had to keep the rear hatch open because they needed cooling, and they needed all that heat to extract out of the motor. People would be like, oh, why'd you leave your trunk open, kind of thing. And
it was also a measure of the cleverness of Karl Abarth, or Carlo Abarth as he was at that point, of course, because he emigrated to Italy. The fact that the elevated deck lid on the 595 served two purposes. One, of course, is to keep the engine cool, because it generated a lot of heat. The other,
downforce.
Downforce. In an era when no one was thinking about it.
Yeah,
and it was incredibly clever.
And I think Fiat did a good job. I don't remember I think it was 2014 or 2015 when they released the 595 edition in that wonderful, I want to say it was Giallo Modena, but it was similar.
A very similar color.
Similar Ferrari color, and it had a little bit wider track, and I think that car was epic. And even the race cars that they've made of these with 300 some odd horse, I cannot imagine. No. This would be like 300 horsepower. It'd be insane.
Yeah, thank you, no. But it would be, it is something that they really paid great tribute. And another unsung car from this Fiat period is the 124 Spider.
Yes.
Sharing the platform of the Mazda Miata, and the Abarth version of the 124 Spider is an amazing car.
Well, I think when I purchased my previous vehicle that I purchased that we will not talk about,
The Voldemort spider, yes.
Yeah, I think you wanted me to, instead of buying a Boxster, you wanted me to get a 124 Abarth.
I think the sweet spot to get the power down and not get the wheel spin on this road is about 4,500 RPM. Past that, I think the gods of physics are saying, non credo che questo sarà possibile in questi tempi.
Well, I love the hilarious shift up gauge that you have there as well. I mean,
exactly.
It's very Italian. It's very dramatic. I mean, all the entire car is just, it speaks volumes to the manufacturer and the country.
And even the pedals are arranged for heel and towing. It's absolutely remarkable. You know, this is yeah, it's a city commuter car. Ha ha ha. And the other thing, which is always so funny, you read some of the reviews and some of the websites, the car analysis websites, and pros, really snappy and fun. Cons, not great fuel economy. People would always ask me when I first got my Mini, "Oh, that must get great fuel economy." I said, "No, it doesn't, and it runs on premium fuel." So it's just small.
I probably do. Yeah, I run premium in mine. I probably do 30 miles a gallon. Granted, I do a lot of highway, but there's a big difference between the eco mode and the sport mode. When you put that, and I'm sure, because this has sport mode as well, which we're in right now, but I'm sure there's a pretty significant difference between the two, and you'd probably conserve a lot more fuel in eco mode, but I don't know how fun that would be.
Yeah, the important thing is, if you want to be in eco mode, then get in your Corolla. Eco mode is the Corolla. This is sport mode.
It is.
It's and we talk a lot about young timer classics, and this is a car which is 10 years old, but I can confidently predict, even with my crystal ball still in restoration, that this is an absolute classic. It's a classic now, and it's certainly a future classic. This is a car that will define performance in a small package for its age.
Well, I mean, you look at collecting, and maybe collectors of a different generation would look down on this, but my generation and the generation under me will look at this as a collector car, and it will continue the hobby going forward, I think.
I see it now, and I'm an old guy. I remember the hot cars of my youth, and that's what's great about this, is that this is one of those cars, think like the original Mini, that is ageless and classless.
Yep.
I think people who are very experienced racers, mature people who love this car, young people who love this car, anyone who gets behind the wheel of this car will love this car.
Yeah. Now I got to get behind the wheel.
Yeah, I think we can arrange that. So let's take a stop up here.
A lot of kids in Gen Z think that paddles mean shifting now.
Right.
And they don't know that shifting is a manual transmission.
It's through a knob and a lever.
Yeah.
Well, that brings up a really good point. I'll let you actually get some driving impressions before I go off on this.
The boost gauge
tangent.
is hilarious.
Yeah. Boost is like, yeah. Yes, you have boost. Instant boost. And that's the other thing, is that turbo lag is something that might as well be described like the plague or the I don't know, the rack or something. I don't think any person who's only driven modern turbo cars even knows what turbo lag is.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate it to my car. The boost on my car kicks in at like 1,300 RPM. It's not like an old car where it's nothing, everything.
Right, exactly. Cue the choir at 2 hours. But isn't this amazing?
It's a lot of fun. It's super fun. And I like the little burble that you get on the exhaust when it comes back around.
Again, there's nothing like the Italians to understand
Drama.
Exactly, drama and character. You know, something's got to have character. It's got to have spirit, anima. You know, it's and just feel like just around 4,500. The front wheels want to let go.
But what's fun about it is we're not going fast, but it feels like we're going really fast. And I think that might be, well, obviously due to the size and the rowdiness of the motor, but it's funny because you're sitting really high, which I feel like, I don't know if it would be slightly different if you were sitting a little bit lower.
Well, you also get a great impression of speed in this car because what does this car have that a lot of performance cars don't have, which is a lot of glass. You're in the environment, so the environment is passing by you at a rate of speed that you're very aware of.
Well, it's kind of like a motorcycle. I mean, you're in a similar position that you would be in a motorcycle with similar visibility, but you actually see everything great.
Yeah, the visibility of this is fantastic, especially for a modern car that has to have these very thick A and C pillars for rollover protection.
This thing is ridiculous.
It is insane. And you see, you already regret that you don't have one.
Well, let's not say that just yet.
Well, you know, we're going to have to watch out.
I probably won't admit it. And I think, so when I first started driving, I wasn't really used to the pedal position because I feel like I'm sitting in a chair position more than I would be in a sports car.
Right, your legs are not sort of extended.
Yeah, but I feel like this car benefits from just, well, I want to say two things. When you drive it, you want to be really aggressive, but I feel like it benefits from light inputs.
Yes.
Very light inputs on the throttle, light inputs on the brake, and light inputs on the clutch. Makes it a lot easier to drive, given its seating position, which is slightly different than what I feel like most people would be used to.
I also like, though, the weighting of the controls, the pedals, the shifter, because it's not too light. One of the things that you get in a lot of economy cars is the super light shifting and pedals. And in a traditional supercar, you get the really heavy. And this is really beautifully balanced so that you're aware of what you're doing.
Middle.
Yeah.
And the steering is super direct. I know that it's slightly electronically assisted.
It is, but you know, I think that the days of electronic assisted steering, or electronic steering for that matter, being a bad thing because it's artificial, I think engineers understand now how to make it work.
They do.
And this is also, I think, rather progressive. You don't really feel it because it's so
it just spins right up.
Exactly, it's there.
Yeah.
I mean, it will take you to and past the although the red line is the rev limiter, which is very interesting. It's sort of the old thing where the cruising speed is the maximum speed in European cars. They used to do in the 50s and 60s all the time. This very much, again, has that kind of spirit.
It does. It does. Well, you mentioned the Mille Miglia earlier, and I've been fortunate through this job and just being lucky enough to drive some really cool cars at a young age, and also very powerful cars. And we were also talking about you don't need a ton of power. When we did the Mille Miglia, the car that we had 46 horsepower.
46 horsepower.
And I joke that is the scariest car I have ever driven in my entire life.
Because power to weight ratio, it weighed 500 kilos. I mean, it was nothing.
Well, it didn't weigh anything, and also you got to give a lot of credit to how far stopping technology has come.
Ah, yes, absolutely.
Cars have essentially always been fast. You look at the 1907 Vanderbilt Renault Racer that we have. I'm good?
Yeah.
You look at the 1907 Vanderbilt Renault Racer that we have in the collection, and that could do what? Almost 100 miles an hour?
Over 100 miles per hour.
Yeah. But
with no brakes
But
whatsoever.
Stopping from 100 miles an hour? I don't think so.
It was a theoretical concept, much like sort of stopping an ocean liner. But again, it's the way you drive it. When you have stopping power and go power like this, you drive in a way that is very much the get on the throttle, get on the brakes.
Yeah.
And with the Fiat, it was very much managing speed through the gearbox.
Yeah.
And you can do the same actually in this car as well. I think for me, it's sort of, you look at this car and the brakes are your secondary options. Because when you come to the turnaround here, see what happens when you just slow it down through the gearbox, because it'll be dramatic. I do that in my Alfa all the time.
All right, I just went to use the brake, but I won't do it.
Yeah.
So we're in third, second.
See how much the car slows down?
Yeah.
Just right there. So, if you're in fourth gear, fourth, third, second, then apply the brakes.
Yeah,
and,
yeah. But the pedal setup in this thing is great.
Oh, it's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. The pedals are wide enough so that you can get them every time, and yet there's still great spacing.
It spins up.
The first gear is insane. I noticed that you're shifting very short out of first, which is smart, because first gear will just wind you up to an unusable amount of power.
It's also, I mean, motorcycles are kind of directly related, because you don't want to come out of the gate in first gear and open the throttle all the way, because it's just going to wheelie.
Right. So
if you can kind of ease your way into the power, again, it's, to me, 0 to 60 times are irrelevant, because why do you need to do 0 to 60 in 3 seconds flat?
Because you're in your Tesla Plaid and you have to get to stoplights.
That's actually 1.9 seconds, Donald.
Wow, and it's what is the vehicle that just surpassed it? The
Lucid Air.
Lucid Air, yeah. So it's but again, it's one of those things too. One of the things that's also very impressive about this engine to me, and see if you agree, is not only is it very accelerative, but it's got great torque, so that when you're in the gear, you give it throttle, and there's more power there for you right away.
And I agree with you 100% that torque is always more exciting than horsepower. And I think torque might be a little bit more difficult to convey on camera, at least to the viewer.
Right. But that's just in your foot.
Yeah, but when you're actually driving the car, and okay, even if I put it in third, right, you're feeling the turbo lag, but it's got a decent amount of torque to bring us there.
That was from like 2,000 RPM in third.
It puts the power down great.
You would think if nobody told you what the horsepower figure on this car was, you'd say it puts out 200 horsepower.
Yeah.
It feels like that.
And it changes direction really nicely. And another thing that I like about it, and at least with a lot of modern cars, when you go through the corners, it's like totally flat. Whereas this, at least you get a little bit of body roll that allows you to understand where the car is positioned.
Correct. This car talks to you.
It does.
Even
when
it's beginning to lose traction, you know it's beginning to lose traction. And it's fantastic. It's my favorite thing. A new car with all the conveniences thereof, in the spirit of an old car.
Yeah. Well, Donald, I think that's a good place to end. Well, you always know how to end these programs so well.
It is the introduction, or the reintroduction, of the spirit of Antonio.
Thanks, Donald.